I'm making this video discussing the series BionicDance Reads the Bible. I know you've said don't bug you about this, but I'd like to give you some advice so you don't get burnt out on it if you ever try taking up the Bible again. I figured I'd also give you some background on what the hell you're reading and why it's so messed up and boring. Firstly, I would like to recommend the book The Bible Unearthed by Israel Finkelstein. It discusses the archaeological evidence and how much of it conflicts with the Bible up to perhaps the book of Ezra. Biblical archaeology is a catch-all term for any Middle East archaeology, just like classical archaeology means Greek and Roman. Unfortunately, since the number one financial supporters of this branch of archaeologists is persons of religious persuasion, I was shocked to find how religiously biased their academic papers are. I was site sourcing for my Intelligent People series that I may get into book format in the next year and a half, and I could find no good biblical archaeologists that didn't start out with the assumption that the Bible's true. There were some that would go into great detail about their findings, really interesting scientific and historic stuff, then just out of nowhere put in a non sequitur statement about, and this may have something to do with this verse and these people in the Bible. I guess if that's the only way to get funding, you gotta do what you gotta do. It's just really sad. Evidence shows that literacy didn't exist in the kingdom of Judah, a little hole-in-the-wall nowhere wilderness, made up by the tribes of Judah, Benjamin, and the priestly Levites until about the reign of King Hezekiah. Judah was also competing with their much more prosperous and larger pagan kingdom of Israel in the north. The two kingdoms had shared history, along with the other former members of the collapsed Canaanite Empire. These two kingdoms had shared history along with religion with the other former members of the collapsed Canaanite Empire. Around the time of Hezekiah, it seems the books of Genesis and Exodus were compiled from around the kingdoms of Judah and Israel. The book of Numbers was also written around that time period, which is why it's so freaking dull. All writing systems start out as record keeping, so you get tons of numerical figures and lineages. Ahab and his father Omri appear to be the first kings that had any massive widespread power in the region that didn't involve Egypt or Assyria, who often considered these kingdoms as their territories. King Josiah was the first king of Judah to have sufficient power and looked to establish dominance through the power of propaganda. So he hyped his ancestors, Joshua, Moses, David, Solomon, and Hezekiah, as being much more powerful than they ever were. Many people's houses today are bigger than King David's palace. Many early archaeologists assumed a lot of old buildings were Solomon's palaces, but unfortunately, they're from the wrong time period to be Solomon's and are now dated to be Omri and Ahab's. Josiah also found the book of Deuteronomy, wrote all the books of Joshua to the Chronicles, except for maybe Ruth, and then went back and rewrote parts of other books that were already written. This put Yahweh as the only God, which had never been that way before, and made David more powerful than Ahab's Israel, and made David a one-time king of Israel. The kingdom of Israel ended up getting so powerful and prosperous, it became of interest to the Assyrians, who ended up invading the nation and displacing about 20% of the most skilled populace and replaced them with outside immigrants, removing the natives and sending them out to other parts of the empire. With Israel's cities burned and their leaders dead or taken away, Judah ended up with a final say on the traditions and history of Israel. Israel was now a shell of its greatness and a vassal of Assyria, while Judah remained free. Relatively. Many Israelites now converted to Judah's one-God religion, creating a new state of Israel with a new fake believed history. Rewriting history is nothing new to conservatives. Their shared history helped the people of Judah embrace the Judean God completely. Had Israel not fallen and we had their version of the story, who knows how different the Bible would have been. Judah did fairly well throughout the years, but spent a lot of time paying tribute until at a certain point. From here on out, it's a spoiler. Babylon invaded and took many of them as slaves. In Babylon, the leaders wanted to maintain community, so they found the book of Leviticus, the one that says gays are evil, to keep themselves separate from the Babylonians, and also did a little bit of biblical revision of their own. The Persians took over Babylon, then Xerxes converted to Zoroastrianism and freed all his slaves. Sadly, many old copies of Zoroastrian texts were damaged, so we aren't sure if the ones we have are exact copies. So we don't know if Zoroastrianism affected Judaism or the other way around, or perhaps a mix of both, because similar ideas like the battle of good and evil appear in the texts around these time periods. Many Jews returned to Israel and rebuilt the temple, but the damage to the truth had long been done and the Old Testament was pretty much compiled and finished. So, BionicDance, what do you have coming up next for you? 2 Kings and the Chronicles are pretty much the same as 1 Kings, just telling you the kings that did good and the ones that did evil in God's eyes. Ezra is about the guy who led the Jews back from Babylon. Nehemiah is about a guy who got money from the Persian king to rebuild the wall and gates of Jerusalem. Esther is about a chick who got married to a Persian king and ended up saving the Jews from an extermination plot. Godwin's Law. Nazis always show up. These might be good to skip to if you're bored and need a break from the tedium of, say, the Kings and the Chronicles. Job is a book about a bet between God and Satan that Job will denounce God if he stops blessing him and takes everything away. The first 3 chapters are interesting, but after that it becomes a philosophy and theology debate between Job's friends, and then Job and God. It gets tedious. Psalms is a collection of ancient praise songs. Proverbs is a bunch of Confucius say words of wisdom attributed to Solomon. Ecclesiastes is a very emo book about how everything is pointless, also attributed to Solomon. The Song of Solomon is a very racy and saucy book about a man and his bride and their sex and love life. How it made it into the Protestant Bible is beyond me, but historians are actually considering it to be about the goddess Inanna and her lover, later replaced with Solomon to, Judaize it just the way Christianity did with most of the pagan holidays. Humorous pickup lines like, "You have breasts like gazelles," is rampant throughout this book. Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel are prophets prophesying about the destruction of Israel. Very long and dull. Lamentations is Jeremiah's emo book about how everything sucks. Daniel is an interesting one, however. Daniel seems to be like a Robin Hood figure during the days in Babylon and Persia, being the model Jew, following Yahweh and having prophetic powers, as well as being defended by God several times for his faith. Oddly, your King James doesn't have 2 stories that are in, I believe, the Catholic Bible, called Bel and the Dragon. These appear in the Catholic Bible because they use different translational texts. The Jewish elders didn't want to put Daniel in because he didn't have historical merit, but people loved his story so much, some of the versions compromised. The story of Bel and the Dragon shows how Daniel outsmarted the Babylonian priests of Bel by laying flour down to prove the priests were actually eating the offerings at night instead of the idol Bel. And the dragon part is, Daniel gives a dragon explosive dumplings, causing its head to explode, exposing it as not an immortal god. Daniel is definitely an interesting book, with the other half involving a lot of symbolic prophecy that Revelation tries to mimic. Other than Jonah, which is a fun read and 4 chapters long, very short, always enjoyable, the rest of the prophets are all boring. Hosea was a prophet that God told to marry a prostitute who would run away, and Hosea would go get her out of trouble to be a symbol of Israel falling away from God and then coming back. After that comes the New Testament, which you can pretty much read straight through. So not putting any pressure on you, just saying you may want to jump around the Old Testament a bit, because there are tons of parts that are just painful tedium with no story at all. Take your time, work your way through, and as I said, it's great to get someone's take on the Bible who was raised brainwashed that everything was holy and sacred. It's a fresh way of looking at things. Good luck in your quest, because you're going to need it.